Well, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Masalski. Thanks for tuning in to this College Bound Success Series. For those of you that may not know me, I am a independent educational consultant, also known as an IEC. And I'm the founder of Masalski Coaching and Consulting. Basically, what it means is I work with college curious and college bound, mainly high school students and their families that are thinking about, do I go to college? How do I go to college? How do we apply for college? How do we pay for college? All of those things. And so that is very wide ranging and a very broad topic. And of course, every family is kind of navigating this differently. So tonight I'm really excited because the personalized work that I do with those families and students that are thinking about life after high school, post-secondary education. And that could be a 4-year school, a 2-year school, trade school, vocational training, apprenticeships, you name it. I'm really excited to be joined tonight by Chris Blankenship. Chris Blankenship, I know, is the founder of Autism Learning Lab. And I know he's come to us tonight from beautiful Silverton, Colorado, way up there, right? What's the elevation of Silverton, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We're at 9,300 feet.
9,300. That's a little. I'm originally from northern Wisconsin. It's a little bit higher where I grew up. So
A little
yeah,
bit.
awesome. Well, Chris, can you just kind of go ahead, share, who you are and a little bit about Autism Learning Lab and what brought you to starting that?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So, I am a licensed therapist. I've been practicing for well over a decade now, primarily practicing in residential treatment. And over the years in residential treatment, what I was noticing is I was getting more and more clients coming in who had not been diagnosed on the autism spectrum, but after just a little bit of digging, it became pretty clear they were struggling not just because of their depression, not just because of some anxiety or social issues or whatever else, but this underlying issue that hadn't been diagnosed. And after
Hmm.
going into the assessment weeds, coming back and saying, well, actually, no one's ever asked this before, no one's ever told you this before, but it looks like you're actually on the autism spectrum. And kind of needing that lower level of support, right? So not the obviously autistic, nonverbal, kind of level 2, level 3 of the diagnosis, but someone who by and large has been able to kind of get along, get through life, get through, elementary school, middle school, high school, and then I work primarily with young adults, and I was seeing a lot of people who got to college and just realized that things were not going to work.
Hmm.
The things that they had leaned on so heavily in their high school years, they weren't there in their college years, and they didn't quite know how to navigate that. And then all the other issues kind of, compounded and things fell apart. And so what I was seeing a lot of is people, not knowing what autism looks like, and, again, except in kind of the most extreme versions of it. And
Right.
then B, what do you do with it, right? Now what? So, about a little while ago, I started developing this idea and came up with the idea of Autism Learning Lab, which is where we really try to focus on not only helping people to get high quality assessments and a full understanding of their diagnosis, but then also once you get a diagnosis, what does it mean? What do you do with it? And so, Autism Learning Lab is really geared towards a kind of education, coaching, training that I saw way too many people need but not be able to get once they got an accurate autism diagnosis.
Interesting. You mentioned, so in my work, right, on the college side, it's an all in, right? I call my client the student, right? The young adult usually, right? But I'm very clear with parents, or their, caregivers, like, hey, I understand, this, even though your student is my client, this isn't all family conversation, right? There's money involved. There's, you know, yes, we'll support them wherever they want to go, but boy, we'd really like them to go to, to this school or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what that looks like in the work that you do with balancing like the needs of the individual that is on, has autism spectrum disorder, but also maybe the families that are like, okay, what do we need to know? How do we support and around this?
Yeah, and that's something that we really do specialize in is not only supporting the autistic teenager, young adults or adults, but also supporting families in navigating it as well, because there are fundamental differences. Parenting an autistic child can look a lot different at times than parenting a neurotypical child, just the same way that being an autistic student can look different than being a neurotypical student. And so we really do focus on not just supporting the individual, but also focusing the family, because we know that the support and the issues can run much deeper than just what one person is experiencing. So focusing on helping parents to give appropriate support or set appropriate boundaries or have appropriate expectations, working on communication skills. The whole family can often benefit from emotion regulation and coping skills. So
Right.
how can we make sure that the identified client, the autistic individual, is getting the support they need, but that the family is also growing alongside them?
Gotcha. Yeah. So what in from your experience, thinking about the the earlier years, what are some of the major challenges that you see, students with autism face in our current, K through 12 kind of environment?
So I think that they're myriad. A lot of times, autistic individuals will exceed expectations in certain subjects and then fall way behind in others.
Oh, gotcha.
There's the repetitive or restricted interests. That's really common for it's a core diagnosis, a symptom of diagnosis. So being really into one thing, maybe you're really into history,
Hmm.
maybe you're really into math, maybe you're really into Shakespeare or whatever it is, you might excel at that. But then, you get into another class that you're not interested in, well, that you might not pay near as much attention. So getting a well-rounded education and getting a well-balanced support in your education, that can often be really difficult. That's kind of the academic side. There's a lot of difficulties with executive functioning, staying on task, things like that, organizing. Those are all really common with autistic people. But then also transitioning. One of the things that I hear and see a lot of from my clients is just having a really hard time transitioning, not necessarily day to day, although that can be a challenge. But one of the bigger disruptions that I see is people going from like the jump from elementary school to middle school, or the jump from middle school to high school, and about how that transition can be really overwhelming. You're in a whole
Hmm.
place, there's often more people, there's often more social dynamics that are at play, and that can be really challenging for autistic people. Especially, I think the kind of social demands, that how they
Hmm.
just get increasingly complex and nuanced. And while you might feel perfectly comfortable, being on the soccer team and playing, whatever it is when you're a kid, once that starts to get into dating and social cliques and someone who says one thing but might actually mean something else, well, that can be really hard to navigate. And so since that's where the vast majority of socializing happens for kids is at school, well, that is going to have trickle down effects just into your everyday academic life. And that's where I think a lot of people really start to struggle. And maybe they didn't know they had autism, but those symptoms might really start to show themselves in those kind of later years.
Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of mentioned like all of a sudden those milestone time periods, right? Those educational transitions. And of course, I'm dealing with that from high school to after, right? Usually looking at, college and so forth. And I think the added layer there is all of the other grades, K through 12, right? The schools are very good at integrating family into things. You have parent teacher conferences, they're invited in, join the parent teacher organization, the PTO, like all this
Right.
stuff. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, after, right, they turn 18, and after that, that switch like turns off. So all of a
Yes.
sudden they're thinking about post-secondary and all of those different ways of supporting and engaging, right, the caregivers. That kind of goes away because of FERPA, the Educational Rights and Privacy Act, and all of a sudden talk about a major transition because everybody used to be engaged in the decision making, and now it's much more about, hey, your student needs to advocate and self advocate, and that's a whole different level.
Yeah, one that they might not be comfortable with. You're absolutely right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So could you just maybe share like what is maybe a strategy or how you would talk to a young adult about, developing those kind of self advocacy skills?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's oftentimes best to start that process not on kind of an administration level or in a school, like a school level, but start it in little ways, right? How can you
Okay.
advocate to your with your parents about a slight change to a rule or expectation? How can you advocate to a friend about wanting to do X instead of doing Y? How can you advocate with your family members, the people that are you're close with? I'll even sit down with folks and we'll practice, right? So, all right, pretend I'm, your dad and you don't like this rule. Now tell me what you don't like about it and how you'd like it to change. So let's
Mhm.
actually just work on like a nice, regulated, firm, consistent way to communicate what your need is. Okay, once you're getting good at doing that in kind of those safe environments, those comfortable relationships, now how can you do this same thing in something that's a little bit more complicated? And you usually start that not necessarily like walking into a Title IX office or an administration office and like, putting down a piece of paper and being like, I need this. But like go to your teacher and tell your teacher that you're struggling with X and a teacher that you trust, teacher that you like, and ask for a little bit of extra time. Okay, what worked? What didn't work? How did you feel? Okay, what can you do differently? So building up to the point where you are walking into that Title IX office or the disabilities office or the counselor's office and whatever, and saying, I'm struggling with this. I need this.
Right.
And that's the process that often, once you're at that point where you have to do it on your own, it's a process that often just gets ignored. And, too many autistic people leave college because they don't get support that is actually available to them if they would just ask.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things that I'm really excited that's coming about in these I think relatively recently is that schools are doing more to support neurodiverse, students and students specifically, with autism.
Yeah.
I'm actually seeing it here in Colorado personally, but it's definitely something that's being looked at, in a greater, I think, amount nationwide as schools are trying to figure out how do we become more supportive, more inclusive, making
Right.
sure we're more open. And it doesn't always look like, your typical kind of 4-year experience. There are schools like UCCS, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Regis, CSU, Colorado State, that have started these inclusive programs that are like 1 year kind of I'm gonna, for lack of a better term, like adulting, like becoming
Mhm.
more independent,
Yeah.
learning those skills while you're still on a college campus and surrounded by those, I guess, kind of typical students going to a 4-year school. So I think that's a really great step that I'm seeing from higher ed.
Agreed, agreed. And, that's one of the things that I feel like has really come about post-pandemic is just the added levels of support and care and attention to not only to helping people learn, but really when it comes down to it, student retention for the schools. Because I think schools have just been losing students so quickly, all that effort that goes into bringing a student into campus goes by the wayside because they're only there for a semester or a year. So what can we actually do to have them be more successful? And the research shows again and again and again, it's not necessarily your academic prowess that is going to lead to academic success in college. It's much more your ability to demonstrate resiliency in the face of struggle, builds a reliable social network, ask for help when you need it. It's all
Yeah.
those adulting skills that are really necessary to step up and succeed in college. And so you can have, the best engineering program in the country. If no one can actually, get themselves out of bed and get to class, it doesn't really matter. So how
Right.
can you help them to manage that first part of their life so that they can take advantage of that second?
Yeah, absolutely. Could you comment a little bit? I think often, and you mentioned this earlier on, I think autism for many people that aren't super familiar with it kind of looks like one thing.
Mhm.
And you alluded to like, no, in fact, it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
What would you say that schools, like if I ran an accessibility office at a college or university, what would you want me to know about, our incoming students and how we might need or want to support students that are on the spectrum?
So, yeah, autism does look very different. Take this in kind of in parts. Looks different for people from different backgrounds. Looks different for people with different different genders. It does not all look like kind of the stereotypical depictions of it that you might see in on your television. Your
Right.
nerdy straight white male who really likes trains or math or something.
Mhm.
It's not all that. There is a higher level of the diagnosis in men and boys, but that number does seem to be closing, and it seems like we're getting a lot better at diagnosing women and girls with autism. They tend to get glossed over quite easily because they're better at doing some things. By and large, women are better at masking, they're better at socializing, they're better at
Mm.
mimicking, they're better at kind of learning the tools necessary to get by. Whereas a lot of autistic boys and men just kind of avoid it and don't do any of those things. That doesn't mean that the girls aren't necessarily autistic, right? That doesn't mean that they're not
Right.
struggling. The fact is that they're having to work 10 times harder at socializing than their non-autistic peers, but
Gotcha.
it might get ignored because like no, it looks like she's trying, it looks like she's interested, and for so long we just assumed that autistic people weren't, but that's really just a fallacy. And same thing goes with people people from different cultures. Things that might very clearly pop as an autistic symptom for someone from a wealthy middle class background, predominantly white community in the United States, that might not pop at all in China or in Pakistan or sub-Saharan Africa. It might just actually just be something
Right.
seen as totally normal. And so really paying attention to not only the individual, but paying attention to what the individual needs and how is what they're experiencing in the academic setting different. And I think that's the biggest thing that we could talk about, and like what I would want someone at one of those offices to know is that I think by and large, schools are doing a pretty good job of providing academic support. Right. I think that like the accessibility of tutors and getting extended time on tests or getting, written notes or whatever it is, I feel like there's a pretty well-worn path for all of those things. And I think that there's a lot of autistic people that need those, a lot of neurotypical people that need that's fine. I think that that's all well established and good. I think where so many autistic people struggle is actually in the social element of the college experience. It's in the housing component of the college experience. It's in all of those kind of ancillary parts of college that are not the academics but are critically important to being successful. Way too many people, I think, are going to college and just expected to jump in and make friends, when they might not have the skills or they might not have the knowledge necessary to go and make that leap. So there are a lot of schools that are increasingly more schools that are providing things like supported social experiences that are that you are encouraged to participate in if for example, you're taking advantage of disability services, right? So actually scheduling a specific social experience, going to people's dorms, getting them, bringing them to it, things like that. Some schools are providing like peer mentors to incoming autistic client and incoming autistic students, right? So someone who knows the ropes, someone who can walk with you from place to place, someone who can take you under their wing and connect them with their social circle. Then there's even the kind of um, vocational components of it that I think are often ignored. So not only how are you getting your autistic student from your freshman year to your senior year, but how are you supporting them in getting a job? What are you doing to give them the life skills necessary to get out there and do something besides just be a student at your institution? And I think that gets ignored way too much. I think there are a number of schools that are doing like hiring initiatives, really working to connect neurodiverse clients with workplaces that focus on hiring neurodiverse people, neurodiverse employees, working with them on not only the kind of academic skill necessary to succeed in the workplace, but also just the life skills that are necessary to succeed in the workplace. And there are even schools that are providing like zero credit classes that you can take on things like resume building or interviewing or and tailoring those to autistic people that I think is really effective, necessary, and a path that is not near as well worn as all those academic supports that we're talking about we're so used to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's some great stuff in there. I have a past client who was on the spectrum, and early on, I was very upfront with, hey, I'm going to be learning about this too, in terms of how I know the college stuff, but in terms of how we work together and communicate. And I just found out early on, what really worked well was especially exploring on the tech side of things, like what tech works for you, like when you
Right.
go to school, what tech works for you so you can be as successful as possible, as a student. Now let's bring that into our relationship. And so, for
Yeah.
example, early on, I mean, let's face it, I have lots of clients, and usually I'm sending emails, right? I'm typing out long messages, email.
Right.
And early on, what he shared was, his client was, it would be really helpful if instead of text, you could just shoot a short video. He was
Hmm.
so much more visual and auditory.
Mhm.
So that's what I started doing. So
Yeah.
instead of our weekly, our homework being this email, it didn't take me long. I would hop on Zoom and it's,
Hmm.
shoot this email. It was closed captioned, right?
Yep. Yep.
And, he could play it at any time of the day and send it to him. And I think that just the ability to say, what do you need, right? What works for you, not me trying to define it or
Right.
stick with, well, this is the way I do it.
Exactly. Exactly. So as much as professors and schools can do things like that, right? Like really meet the student where they're going to be much more likely to learn, right? Like giving them a voice to text option when they're typing out their notes, giving them an opportunity to do tests like that, right? Like giving them the like quiet spaces in which they can actually retreat from school if they or class if they need to, setting up dorms in different ways. Like there's so many ways that can be so many things that can be done that can actually meet an autistic student where they're at and give them what they need to be successful. So that, because by and large, they're going to have the intelligence. If they got into school, they're going to have the intelligence to do the
Yeah.
work. They might just need some tweaking of the system because right now the system is designed for neurotypical students, and that
Mhm.
might not work for them. And that's no fault of their own, but it is incumbent upon the institution to do a better job of reaching all the students and giving them what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking about this, life after high school, what's one piece of advice that you would give to families and, their students with autism who are just kind of starting out this, a college search, like thinking about what's next? What's one thing you'd advise them?
So, I think that there's the obvious things of the like find a school that has something that you're interested in studying. The like look for places that have a support system for autism and that you would actually want to take advantage of. I imagine most listeners have thought about on and kind of gone through all of that kind of stuff. But the one piece that maybe is unique that maybe people haven't thought about is something that I see quite a bit of with clients that are autistic and have gone to college, is actually just thinking about the culture of the school and the culture of the community. Um, there are it, there's something that is really important about just the environment that you are in. And if you have spent your whole life in one environment and then you go to something that is very different, it doesn't matter if they have the exact space program or the exact, engineering program or the exact biochemical program that you're interested in. If you feel like a fish out of water in your community and you don't actually enjoy the community you're in, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I'm working with someone right now. She's very smart. She's from a small mountain town in Colorado, did very, very well, got into an elite school on the East Coast, has the perfect program for her. She's so excited about it. She goes out there and she's just like, oh, it's gray all the time here. And
Right.
no one likes going outside, and no one is interested in going on a hike or going to sit by the river. And everyone went to a private school, and everyone comes from just a very different culture than me.
Mhm.
And she could have gone to a really, great program that is in a place where people do like going outside and the sun shines sometimes. And it has a little bit more, diversity of previous high school experience, academic experience. And she would do 10 times better. And again, it's not because she
Mhm.
can't handle the work. She could blow the work out of the water. That's not the issue. The issue is she looks around and it's not her culture, it's not her place, it's not her people. And
Right.
for an autistic person in particular, that transition might be 10 times more jarring. So pay attention not just to the school and the supports and the disability services and the majors, but pay attention to like, and this is going to sound airy and stupid, but pay attention to the vibe of the school and the vibe of the community.
Mhm.
And is this a place that you could actually see yourself living? Would you want to stay here afterwards? Because if it's not, you're probably not going to enjoy living there in the first place. You probably shouldn't go to that school. You can find a similar school in an environment and in a community and a culture that more closely aligns with what you're comfortable with. And that's going to be ultimately a significantly better fit.
Yeah. And that's great advice for anybody. That
Yes.
that I mean, fit, right? Fit is so important. So
Right.
I do want to highlight, I mentioned some of the Colorado schools, to your point, there are schools that have been doing the support for a long time. Like I know Adelphi University in Garden City, New York, Rochester Institute of Technology, University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, University of Arizona has what's called the SALT program. Now, I think
Yeah.
one of the things that families should know, some of these programs do have additional costs associated with them.
Right.
And
Right.
some students might have to apply an interview. So I've done that kind of preparation too. Like they're going to ask you, what kind of questions are they going to ask you about getting into these kinds of programs? So um there are lots of schools, but to your point, I've even had people like, this is my top school, and they go there and it's in the Pacific Northwest,
Mhm.
and they contact me later, they're like, Mark, it rains here all the time. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like,
Yeah.
but it rains all the time. I'm like, yeah, I know. And they're
Yeah.
like, that's not what I want. I'm like, yeah, well, that's an important consideration. And we talked
It is.
about it, but it's one of those things you don't know until you know. Right.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, Chris, I want to, before we kind of wrap up and everything, I just want to, is there anything that I haven't asked you or we haven't talked about that you'd like to highlight at this point?
Um, I think one of the things that is interesting, I've had some people ask me in the past, is it okay to disclose my autism in the application process?
Thank you. Great question. Yes.
Yeah, and now that's something I know I've navigated with a couple of people. Just to I don't want to I don't want to be the person with a disability. I don't want to be, the person who has to go in and get the special services. I don't want them to know that I'm autistic. What if then they deny my application because of it? And you mentioned FERPA earlier, and I think that it's important for people to pay attention to, like, the fact that, like, your application, your educational record, that is private, that is confidential, people can't access that. um People aren't going to be turned down because of disclosing something like that on an application. Schools want to know so that they can provide the support, but if your application looks good otherwise, that's not going to be a detriment. And so, what I would say to anyone who's worried, like, do I disclose my autism when I'm going through the college application process? Um, I think that there is more harm to not disclosing it than there would ever be to disclosing it, and that fact that there isn't harm in disclosing it. And what I encourage a lot of the people that I work with, families and individual clients, is you need to be open and honest. If you apply to a college and they turn you down, then that's not a college that you would want to be at anyway. If you need support, you need to be open and honest about what you might need. And that way you're going to be much more likely to get it. And so for everyone, it's not something, if you write, I'm autistic in your application, it's not going to be then broadcast to the world. They're not going to turn your application down. What they will do, though, is if they accept you, they'll make sure that they can support you with the services that you need. And that initial disclosure is a really important part of that puzzle.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up because you're absolutely right. And what I advise, clients of mine that I work with is I ask them to view the admissions process and the educational supports as separate things.
Yep.
So admissions process is, it's going to be read by admissions counselors, focus on your academic, abilities. They're going to look at things like your high school academic record, your GPA, courses you took, things like that.
Yep.
But this is where kind of that, I would say, that self-advocacy comes in.
Wow.
It is totally fine to reach out to the Office of Accessibility or whatever they're called. I think some are so called disability services, things like this. And that's where you can share, hi, this is who I am. These are the needs I have.
Right.
Is this the kind of supports that you can provide? Because I think, to your point, just getting in and then assuming that they're going to have everything to support you, that's I don't think that's a winning strategy.
No, no, not at all. Not at
Yeah,
all.
yeah. Awesome. Great. Well,
Well,
Chris, if somebody's listening to this, they want to learn more about you, your team, Autism Learning Lab, how do they get in touch with you?
yeah, thanks so much. You can go to autismlearninglab.com. On there, we got a learning hub that's filled with all sorts of stuff, people can just take from the website, take with them, trainings, too much research, podcasts, support groups, whatever it is that would be beneficial for you. We also do coaching for individuals and for families. And we also offer retreats here in southwestern Colorado. If you want to come out and do some autism informed coaching and also some family adventures high up in the mountains, then we'd love to have you.
There's no better place in southwestern Colorado for adventures. It's beautiful. So
It is. It's
awesome.
lovely.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thanks so much for your time. This has been really helpful, and I hope families and people that listen to this, I'm sure they've gotten some takeaways, and I hope they also will reach out to you with questions that they have. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, yeah, thanks. And for everybody who listened in, thanks so much. If you ever do have any questions, again, I'm Mark. You can reach me on my website, which is mastalskicoaching.com. I will make sure that's in the show notes and everything. And feel free to reach out for any college curious, college bound student questions you may have. Thanks, everybody.